Now, November isn't too far away, and political campaigns are kicking into high gear across the country. But a ballot initiative in California just might be the most explosive political decision of them all. I'm talking about Proposition 19, which, if passed, would make marijuana legal. It's called the Regulate, Control, and Tax Cannabis Act of 2010. Now, while supporters claim that legalization could bring in millions of dollars in revenue for the state, whose financial situation is so dire that they've been handing out IOUs, opponents are worried, of course, about what could come with complete legalization. Will California then turn into a state of stoners, more so than it already is? Will kids be able to pick it up at the grocery store like candy? Or will allowing the product to be regulated reduce drug use and drug arrests and start a trend across the U.S.? Well, join me to discuss it in studio is Alan St. Pierre, the Executive Director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And from our studio in Los Angeles is Chief Kim Rainey, Police Chief of Covina, California. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for joining me. Now, Alan, I'll start with you since you're right here in the studio. Tell me what that would mean if weed really was just legalized across the board in California. Would we have just everyone running around stoned all the time?
Well, as you set it up, no more so than they already are in California after 74 years of prohibition.
That's a stereotype.
Yes,
That's a stereotype.
No, there's always a kernel of truth to those stereotypes.
I'm from California, so I can make fun of my own.
One it would do is stop the arrest of 70,000 Californians every year for using marijuana. It would bring in some needed tax dollars, and it would get police to prioritize crimes that the public really cares about. Arresting people for marijuana is not one of them.
Now, in Los Angeles, you are a police chief. You are part of the law. And there has been so much criticism over the way that the drug war is fought in this country. You know, there's a lot of statistics that say that, in fact, the drug war hasn't in any way coincided with the decrease, of drug use. So what do you think would happen if Prop 19 actually passes?
Well, here's the challenge. First of all, the drug war is a term that was coined in the late 60s by the Nixon administration. But the truth of the matter is this is an initiative that has no hope of taxing, regulating, and controlling marijuana. And that's why the chiefs of police throughout the state, the sheriffs throughout the state, the governor of California, both candidates for governor on both sides of the ballot, both attorney general candidates on both sides of the ballot, 25 major newspapers up and down the state of California on both sides of the social and political spectrum are against this initiative. And it's not so much the conversation about the legalization of marijuana, it's that this initiative is so poorly written is going to create more issues than it answers.
So how is it exactly that this initiative is going to work? I mean, tell me why it's not actually going to regulate or control or bring in revenue.
Well, it's not going to work. First of all, the myth is that it's going to bring in $1.4 billion to the general fund of California to help us during this downturn in the economy. Truth of the matter is the state of California doesn't get 1 cent if this initiative passes. Instead, every city, which are 478 cities in California, or every county, which there's 58, now has to develop their own taxing, regulation, and control mechanism or scheme to try to regulate this. So you're going to have over 500 governmental bodies with different taxing schemes, taxing rates, regulatory schemes. It is a public policy disaster.
Now, Alan, what do you have to say to that? I mean, if this is going to be just a public policy disaster, a bureaucratic nightmare, then what's the point?
Well, having lived through the same discussion in 1996, when the same group of politicians and all the papers in California and all the law enforcement came out against Prop 215 to make medical marijuana legal, what happened? The voters didn't believe them then. They're likely not going to believe them now. And just like with other type of taxation issues, the counties surely should be able to take this money in, and it's unfortunate that the state is not. We shouldn't blame the state for being foolish here. The counties are going to come in and take the money, and they're going to get those monies to schools and hospice centers and libraries and to this man's salary.
Well, you know, actually, I want to...
Unfortunately, he couldn't be further from the truth. I'm sorry. He couldn't be further from the truth. First of all, in 1996, the voters of the state of California, the Medical Marijuana Act was presented as a Compassionate Use Act. And the voters in California are compassionate people. They felt that if somebody would benefit medically from marijuana, they were all for that. And the chiefs of police in the state of California understand that argument. problem is only
But you were
2%
against it.
of the people in California using marijuana are getting any kind of medical benefit from this. The
According
other 98% are using it recreationally.
According to you, the chief of...
The
that's
League
ridiculous.
of League of California Cities and the umbrella organization for the counties throughout the state are both against this initiative because they realize, even though theoretically, according to the proponents, they're going to get money from this, it is a disaster for them, and they want nothing to do with this initiative.
Now, Kim, but do you think if it wasn't this initiative that was so flawed, would you be in support of legalizing marijuana? Do you think that this is something that every Californian, every American maybe one day should have the option to do, like they have the option to drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes?
We think it's time for a national discussion, and that discussion should be, are we as a society ready to legalize another intoxicant, and are we prepared for the unanticipated consequences? You can't have states individually breaking off and going against federal law and federal policy. It's time for a national conversation.
But consequences like what? I mean, tell me what's so scary about the fact that people can smoke weed legally.
Well, here's going to be the issue. We're going to create a whole new category of drivers here in California called a drugged driver. And you're going to have people under the influence or intoxicated by marijuana. Since 2004, fatal traffic accidents in California where the driver involved in the fatal accident tested positive for marijuana has increased 100%. An estimate by an analyst from the National Traffic Highway Safety Administration estimates if this measure passes, that number is going to increase by 300%. So I'll make an offer to my good friend in the studio there, and that if this measure passes, one of the difficult things we have to do in law enforcement is we have to go knock on the doors of families whose family members have been killed either by crimes or by fatal traffic accidents. And I'll have an open invitation that he can go with us and knock on the door, explain to this family that their husband, wife, daughter, son has been killed in a motor vehicle accident. The other driver was under the influence of marijuana, and he can explain why this is such a splendid idea.
Well, I've had the same pleasure of going to my family's house to explain how my cousin died of alcohol abuse while driving. It doesn't make a case to keep 73 years of prohibition together. So if you really want to have that level of control like you have for alcohol, we must legalize it. Keeping it illegal doesn't give you control as a police officer.
But tell me this. I mean, let's say that a police officer does pull you over if, if Prop 19 does pass, and they think that you're stoned. How do they test you right there on the spot? Then everyone's going to say, well, you can't tell because you can't smell my breath. And it becomes an invasion of privacy, perhaps?
For the last 40 years, at least, California police have been arresting people for using marijuana, clearly. What they do now, actually, ironically, is test people and only test for the metabolites, which actually doesn't test for impairment like you have for blood alcohol content. So NORML actually believes strongly you shouldn't drive a car impaired, and saliva test and maybe other breath tests in the future will make it so that you cannot drive while intoxicated, which we don't support at all.
All right, well, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here. We're out of time, but, of course, these are all of the repercussions, the things that people are going to keep discussing, whether Prop 19, I think, passes or not, because it does seem like California is a place where the willpower, at least from some people, to get legal marijuana passed is not going to go away.
Well, this is part of that national discussion.